Let's now take a look at interfaces. So the first question you're going to ask yourself is, what is an interface, right? An interface is something that you can use to define the shape or the structure of some object of some sort. So to create an interface, you type the keyword interface. So this word only exists in TypeScript, doesn't exist in JavaScript. So let's say I'm going to define a computer, for example. So I'm going to say computer, open and close curly braces. Now, inside of this computer, I can determine the shape that I want every computer to have. So anything that has this type of computer, that has this interface, then they're going to have to adhere to certain rules that I'm going to have inside of this interface. So for example, I can say every computer is going to have a name. So I'm going to say name, and then I'm going to give it a type of string. Okay, so that's the difference. As you can see here, I'm not assigning any value. For example, I'm not doing something like this, like passing a string here for the name. That's not going to work in an interface. In the interface, you only describe the shape, which means this computer is going to have a name property, again, describing the shape of an object. So I'm going to say the name property has to be a string, and let's say RAM also has to be a string, and then we can say size, and let's say that has to be a number. And now we have this interface, and we can type anything that we want to this interface. So for example, I can say let latitude, that's one of the first computers that I ever had. I don't remember the number, but it was like one of the old models. And then I'm gonna say that's a type computer. So I can just define it like this. Now, anything that I assign to a latitude here, so the variable that has the type of computer, it has to adhere to these three variables. So for example, I can say latitude, and then I'm gonna set it equal to an object. And then inside of this object, I have to define a name, a RAM, and a size, and they have to be, the same type. So the name has to be a string, the RAM has to be a string, and the size has to be a number. As you can see that it's giving me an error already because I'm not following the properties from the computer type. So now I can do name, and then at this point, I'm gonna assign actual values. So here, let's say latitude. And for the RAM, I'm just gonna say the RAM is, 32 gig or something. And then let's define the size, which I'm gonna say 15, for example. As you can see now, the error is gone. And now my object, which is this latitude, it has to follow this structure. It has to has this shape that you can see here. And I can hover over it. You can see that it's of type computer, which is this type that we define up here. Another thing we can have inside an interface is a method. So I can go down there, and I can say this interface also has to have a method that I'm just going to name it connect. And let's say it's going to take an adapter, for example. So adapter, which is going to be some kind of string. And here, what I'm going to say is I'm going to give the return type. So say it's not going to return anything. So I'm going to say void. You can see that I'm not implementing this method in any way. I'm just defining the shape that the method has to have. So now inside of this latitude, you can see it's giving us an error because we need now to define the connect. So down there, I'm going to say connect, and we're going to take the adapter. So adapter, which is going to be a string, and then it's going to return void. Now I'm going to give an implementation, and I'm going to open and close curly braces. And let's say I'm just going to console.log. Let's do something like power on connected to adapter, and then we pass in the adapter that we got. Adapter. So now this is a concrete implementation of this function here that I defined just the shape. I can remove that space. So you can see that you can define everything that you want a certain object to have using an interface. So now I can come down, and let's say we're going to call the latitude and then call the connect, and say we connect it to adapter 1, for example, right? So we're just going to call the connect. If we go ahead and run this file now, you can see that power on connected to adapter 1. And I can go ahead and log the entire property. So I can do console.log and then pass in the latitude so that we can see everything, and then run this file again. You can see that we have the object right here. So this is how you define an interface. And interface, again, they're used to define the shape or the structure of certain object. Now, there's a difference between interface and type. For example, you can do the same thing. So you can say type and then really just put an equal sign here. And you can see that that would do the same thing. And I can go ahead and run the code. You can see that we get the same result. But the difference between type and interface is that a class can implement an interface or multiple interfaces. And also, whenever you're defining shape of objects, most likely you're not going to use a type, you're going to use an interface. And also you can have union in type. So for example, I can have a type of number or string, but I can't have union type whenever I have an interface. There's other things that I can do to manipulate an interface. Of course, they're very, very flexible and I use them a lot, but those are the main differences between interface and type. Type can have union type, but for interfaces you can't, and interfaces are widely used in a definition file. So if you have a library, even if it's a JavaScript library, they usually have definition files that are in TypeScript. So they're heavily used to create a contract that if a class implements certain interfaces, then they have to define certain field, or they have to implement certain methods. So they're really very flexible and widely used in a lot of languages, and also in a lot of type definition.